Thank you, Paul. First, let me say hello to everyone and introduce myself. My name is Jack Klieger, and welcome everyone. I am the president and CEO of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Welcome to the 23rd annual Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Conference for Educators. Speaking on behalf of the museum's board of trustees, our staff, our volunteers, and our community of Holocaust survivors, we remember our friend, Fanya Gottesfeld Heller, of blessed memory. Fanya was a survivor, a philanthropist, and an author who went through the pain of recounting her own experiences in order to teach others, an important gift to every student and educator she encountered. We all learned from Fanya's dedication to Holocaust education and Jewish learning. I would like to highlight Mrs. Heller's memoir for children, Hidden, A True Story of the Holocaust, which documented her remarkable story so that people of all ages could learn from it. In keeping with the museum's mission of transmitting education across the generations, we're honored today to have Fanya's daughter, Dr. Jacqueline Heller, who will be in discussion with Joshua Greene, the co-author of Fanya's best-selling memoir. Jacqueline herself, Dr. Heller, wrote her own book, Yesterday Never Sleeps, which explores what it means to be the descendant of survivors, and which we will be discussing today as well. The museum has been honored to welcome the annual Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Conference for Educators since 1999. Every year, this conference brings world-renowned scholars together to address groundbreaking issues in Holocaust studies. We're pleased to be able to offer this conference in her memory today. We miss Fanya Gottesfeld Heller dearly, and we are honored to remember her with her family, members of whom are with us today in the audience as well. We hope that it's of comfort to be among so many teachers whose lives Fanya Heller touched, and to know that through these teachers, her story will reach thousands of students. At this time, I'd like to invite Paul Rudensky, Senior Director for Education and Visitor Services at the museum, to begin the program. Paul?
Thank you, Jack. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Paul Rudensky. Jack, thank you very much for your introductory comments. I am pleased to welcome all of you here to our conference today, the 23rd Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Conference for Educators here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Our topic today is Memoir as History, Teaching the Holocaust to Younger Audiences. And I just wanted to say a couple of remarks about that. As the number of people who actually witnessed the Holocaust shrinks, the importance of teaching the Holocaust grows. We are trying to expand our audience to include teaching elementary and middle school students in an age-appropriate way. The museum has responded to this effort in a number of ways, but most recently by creating our inspiring and child-friendly exhibition about the Danish rescue of its Jewish community, Courage to Act. As Jack mentioned, Fanya Gottesfeld Heller was a survivor who spoke to thousands of students and whose message of hope and gratitude connected with her audience. Ms. Heller wrote a memoir about her experiences during the war that was especially designed for young people. This work, Hidden, A True Story of the Holocaust, was co-written with the renowned award-winning author, educator, and filmmaker, Joshua M. Greene. Today, Joshua Greene will explore how the Holocaust can be presented to elementary and middle school children. Afterwards, Mr. Greene, together with Dr. Jacqueline Heller, Fanya's daughter, a psychiatrist and therapist, will explore how parents, educators, and therapists can provide a nurturing environment for young people to examine their thoughts and feelings, create their own narrative, and help them develop agency and autonomy. Moreover, Dr. Greene and Dr. Heller, Mr. Greene and Dr. Heller will discuss how children who develop empathy at an early age will be less likely to become bullies or succumb to peer pressure. We will have some time for Q&A after the discussion. After the Q&A, we are honored to be granting the Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Award for Excellence in Holocaust Education to an outstanding educator, Don Panabianco. Later today, I will be sending out an email with an evaluation form and a CTLE application. If you would like to receive CTLA hours, please complete the form and return it to me. Finally, thanks to a generous donor, we have copies of both Fanya's book and Jackie's book for those who have attended today's program. If you would like to attain your copy of these books, please visit us at the museum and let me know that you're coming, and I will arrange to have them held for you at the visitor services desk. Let me share a word about each of our speakers. Joshua M. Greene is a fellow at the Yale University's Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies. His book on Holocaust history have sold more than 500,000 copies and are published in 5 languages. His documentary films on war crime trials and eyewitness testimony are seen on PBS and Discovery. His most recent book for scholastic middle grade readers, Signs of Survival, was optioned for television by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment. Dr. Jacqueline Heller is a psychoanalyst and a physician with a certification in psychiatry and neurology. Over her nearly 40-year career, she maintained a psychiatry practice, taught and supervised psychiatrists in training, and facilitated their process groups. Dr. Heller has been an active member of the clinical faculty at the David Geffen School of Medicine, Department of Biobehavioral Sciences, UCLA, since 1989. Dr. Heller is certified by the Center for Reflective Parenting and has led parenting groups. As Jack had mentioned, Dr. Heller recently published Yesterday Never Sleeps, How Integrating Life's Current and Past Connections Improves Our Well-Being, a work that is in part clinical, academic, and memoir. The narrative is informed by her experience as a psychiatrist and as a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. At this time, well, let me just go over the schedule with you briefly, then we'll turn everything over to Joshua. So in a moment, Joshua will be giving his presentation about educating younger audiences about the Holocaust. At 1:25, he and Dr. Heller will join the conversation. At 1:50, we'll have Q&A. 2:15, we'll do the presentation of the Educator Award, and we hope to wrap up by 2:30. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to present Joshua Greene.
Thank you, Paul. I'm grateful for the chance to be with you today. My remarks will take no more than 15 minutes. And then I'm looking forward to the discussion with Jackie, whom I've had the pleasure of counting as a friend now for several years. I've thought about our time together and asked myself what the takeaways might be. What have I learned as an author of books for middle grade students that might be useful to you as educators? 3 ideas came to mind. I'd like to mention them briefly and then go into a little bit of detail. I've learned, first of all, to not generalize about the Holocaust. I've learned instead to humanize, to particularize. Yes, some generalizations are useful. Government policies, for example, did apply to all Jews. And yes, the vast majority of Nazi sympathizers did turn a blind eye to Nazi crimes. It is, I believe, misleading, however, to say that the Germans did this or the Jews did that. There were individual men, women, and children, and small groups who reacted in their own way. The second point I'd like to discuss with you is that I've learned to not isolate the Holocaust exclusively as a lesson in good behavior. It may be tempting to use the Holocaust to convey a message such as don't bully or be an upstander. But I've learned that there is great value in teaching about the dangers of bullying or the value of speaking up, but those values are different from teaching about the Holocaust, which was the state-sponsored systematic destruction of European Jewry. So it's understandable that we don't want to expose young people to such atrocities. But authors like me need to be careful to not limit the destruction of European Jewry to a lesson in morality. The third point I'd like to mention to you is that I've learned, it's an adjunct to the second one, to deepen the conversation. In the beginning, I think I made an assumption that young people may not be able to understand a lot about the Holocaust. And then I've discovered that young people are capable of grasping even very complex ideas, provided I do my job properly and make those ideas approachable. So those are the 3 topics I'd like to discuss with you. And let me just take a few minutes to expand on each of those 3. First of all, I've learned to not generalize about the Holocaust. Well, it's become a cliche to say that no one can understand a number like 6 million. And it's a cliche because it's true. We can understand one person's story, which speaks to the power of biographies, to the power of diaries, memoirs, audio and video testimony, to create empathy in the mind of a 12-year-old. The people we're discussing have to be real to them. So as an author, that means I have a responsibility to dig into the protagonist's character and experiences deep enough to bring them to life for young readers. Writing, for example, about Jackie's mother, Fanya, I started making connections with my own mother, who was, like Fanya, an intelligent, independent woman who defied social conventions. She was her own person, and she built a life on her own terms, the way Fanya did. So for me, finding a point of tangency in my own life helped me to communicate to a young reader. The point being that 6 million people are not just a statistic. They were individuals with fascinating backstories and not just victims. Let me suggest that we broaden the narrative to include perpetrators when possible. Not many of them gave their testimony. Ordinary citizens, so-called bystanders, clergy, liberation soldiers, partisans, each one with a story that is rich and insightful. If all you have, and my heart goes out to Holocaust teachers working in schools today, if all you have is 3 days or a week to teach this universe that we call the Holocaust, my suggestion would be that it's better going inside the life of one person and making that story real than focusing on events and dates in history. The second discovery as a writer, which was to not downgrade the Holocaust to a lesson in good behavior. Jackie will speak more about the emotional and affective dimensions of memory. But here's one quick story. I live on Long Island, and there was a group here a few years ago who approached me asking if I would help advise them about a documentary they wanted to produce. The documentary was on Holocaust survivors who had made their home on Long Island. So I said, okay, send me some information about what you want to do. They sent me a flyer, and the flyer read, "These wonderful people represent the will to survive. They represent all that is noble in the human spirit." All right, time out here. There's 6 million who perished. They had no will to survive. They had no noble human spirit. I think I've probably screened about 800 hours of survivor video testimony. I don't recall once hearing a survivor talk about himself or herself as a hero. What you hear about from survivors is the unheroic things they had to do just to survive. Language like I read on that flyer from these good people on Long Island says more about our need for closure than about the realities of history. You know, the Holocaust, for me, having been trained the way I was at the Fortunoff Archive at Yale, is not the best place for seeking redemptive messages about human nature and lessons in good behavior. And sometimes, I admit to you, I wonder whether it may not even be a disservice to insist that students all become activists and upstanders, as they're sometimes called. How does that make young people confronting challenges at home or other kinds of behavioral issues feel if they are not up to the grade, if they are unable to live up to that kind of high, noble standard? I don't know the answer. Maybe Jackie and I can talk about that later. Finally, the third point I wanted to review with you about deepening the conversation. If the only book that young people read is the Diary of Anne Frank, then they will learn nothing about the Holocaust. Anne Frank knew nothing about the Holocaust. She left off her diary before she ever saw the inside of a concentration camp. If you have a class on adolescent behavior, it's a wonderful book. A valuable book would have been volume 2 of Anne Frank's diary, which she did not live to write. Had she lived through Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, she could have told us some very important things about her experiences and perhaps even criticized volume 1 of her own diary. So if you're going to read a young person's memoir, I suggest you add to the Diary of Anne Frank. For example, Hannah Levi-Haas's book, Diary of Bergen-Belsen. Here we also have a teenage girl's memoir, but it's much more about what the actual experience was like. So then the question arises, why is Anne Frank so popular? Well, precisely because it avoids exposing young people to the realities of what occurred. Nobody wants to traumatize their students. So should we celebrate the human spirit? Yes, of course we should, but let's do it with our feet on the ground. My experience has been that even people who should know better have difficulty understanding this point. One very distinguished organization here in New York, where I live, came to see me after a film I had produced called Witness Voices from the Holocaust aired on public television. And the head of educational services said to me, you know, Mr. Greene, this is a very powerful film, but I don't think we can use it in our educational programs. I said, okay, well, why is that? She said, well, the ending is very sad. Could you change that? Now, you can't make this up. I'm quoting verbatim here. Let me give you another example. I'm going to guess that most of the people in this program today have seen Schindler's List. Well, if you remember the end of Schindler's List, you know what I'm talking about. Does anyone actually believe for a moment that at the end of World War II, black and white transformed into glorious color, and the survivors of the camps linked arms and walked over the hillside to Palestine singing Hebrew folk songs? Well, that never happened. That's Hollywood, not history. The point is that without the Hollywood ending, we're left with reality. And the reality is too hard to bear. So we invent things to make ourselves feel better. And I think young people deserve more respect than that. So don't be afraid to complicate the issues about, for example, what is moral under such extreme circumstances? In one video testimony, there's a woman named Helen who tells us she found her mother in Auschwitz, who was so starved that Helen gave her mother her own thin slice of bread to eat. In the next testimony, this comes from Witness Voices from the Holocaust. We hear from a woman named Hannah, who was so hungry, she stole her bunkmate's piece of bread and ate it. So should we condemn Hannah for stealing her bunkmate's bread and celebrate Helen for being so selfless? Or do we have to redefine such terms as ethics and morality under such extreme circumstances as a concentration camp? In another testimony, we learned that the 17-year-old Siggy Wilzig was forced by camp guards to choose between two trucks. One truck went to a work detail, the other went to the gas chamber. He chose one at random and he lived. Well, was Siggy smart or was he just lucky? In the same testimony, he describes how he lied constantly about what skills he said. He would tell the guards, oh, I'm a professional bricklayer, or I'm a professional doctor's assistant, just to get jobs that kept him alive. And it worked. But for every Siggy who exercised cunning and resourcefulness in that way, I can show you 100 accounts of people who also exercised cunning and intelligence and who did not survive. the camp guards had a game. They would say, we need 25 bookkeepers. So 25 bookkeepers stepped forward. They were all killed. The world of the camps was a world where rational thinking was turned upside down. So under such circumstances, what constitutes heroism? What constitutes morality? Does surviving equate to bravery and the human spirit? Or was it, as many have told us, a question of luck, pure and simple? So these are some thoughts I thought were worth passing along to you. And I want to just end by thanking you for dedicating yourself to young people, especially at a time when the world is also once again topsy-turvy, and for committing yourself to reminding young people that our humanness needs to be nurtured carefully and what the dire consequences can be if we neglect to do that. So thank you very much.
Joshua, thank you very much for your very, thoughtful and meaningful comments. Much appreciated. There's a lot to consider there, and thank you. Now we're going to go to a conversation between Joshua and Joshua Greene and Dr. Jacqueline Heller. So welcome, Dr. Heller. And please unmute.
There we go. Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to my conversation with you, Joshua. Where do we start? That was amazing and a lot. You covered a lot of material there.
Well, Jackie, I have to say that knowing you has deepened my appreciation for the complexities of Holocaust studies by adding a dimension to it that I was really not particularly aware of. You speak in your book, and I want to recommend this book to everyone on this Zoom today. Yesterday Never Sleeps does something quite extraordinary. Jackie manages in approachable language to introduce sophisticated ideas of therapy in a way that, frankly, as a meditator, I find quite reminiscent of contemplative practices, mindfulness, and so on. I think, Jackie, that's one of the things that kind of bonded us together, is that we both have an affection for meditative practices. Could you maybe just begin by describing a little bit for our guests about how this affective dimension of human nature can inform our understanding of something so complex as Holocaust history?
Well, it's a big topic and a big question. I think the most important thing I can offer is to say that, I mean, in a global sense, human nature is such that we compartmentalize and categorize and disavow things that are difficult for us. As you said, people revise their stories, and because it hurts, and we're designed to avoid pain and to be as comfortable as possible and survive with as little energy output as necessary. So I think the thing from my standpoint is being a child of survivors, and I think I take it to the next level as far as generational trauma. The problem is that frequently traumatic memory is laid down differently than normal memories, and they're often fragmented. And when they're retrieved, they're updated. All memories updated when it's retrieved. It's updated for the context, and it's very important to do that. So, because otherwise, how do you keep on going? I mean, I think you yourself have said that, survivors themselves revise their story 30 years later. It's a different story. It's somewhat sanitized, or it's a little bit more optimistic in some way, because it's very hard to go on living with things that are so tragic and so cataclysmic. But from a standpoint of being a second generation, I think what my book does, and what I try to do, is explain how when people are flooded with emotion that's overwhelming raw emotion that they can't regulate, that they can't modulate, it often gets stifled, and the stories are disconnected from the emotional life. And then you get very scared children, because if kids grow up in a household where nothing's said, but the emotionality is so intense and so extreme, it's very frightening, and kids end up with a lot of free-floating kind of terror. So that's one reason why it's very important not to tell, kids this age gruesome, gory details, because they can't necessarily modulate these big feelings of fear and terror. So that's one thing I need to say about, but there's more. So if you want to go on, we can.
Right. Well, I mean, this is critical. You bring to mind for me a number of testimonies that I've looked at where people say things that are historically inaccurate. It's just wrong. And it's understandable. People didn't keep calendars and diaries, with dates and days of the week when they were in concentration camps. So it's understandable that historic detail may not always be completely accurate. That doesn't deny the truth of what they're saying. There's a memorable quote from the late Holocaust survivor. I'm drawing a blank now. Her name will come to me in a moment. Who wrote that about her own memoirs of her time in Auschwitz, that what she says she cannot promise today is true, but she promises that it is truthful. She makes the distinction between historic accuracy and emotional reality. Maybe we could talk just a little bit more about that, because I know that in writing your mother's story, I confronted the difference between what may have been historically accurate and the way she chose to remember. Charlotte Delvaux, by the way, was the name of that late French survivor. Would you tell me a little bit about your encounter with your mother's memories?
I mean, a story is different than a narrative. A story may be a factual recitation of what happened, whereas a narrative is a person's meta thought about their story. It's a conceptual leap, but it's very important. I think this is the most important thing that anyone can learn from me, is that being able to know your feelings, being able to identify your feelings, and know what your emotions are about, and then express them, is very important for self-regulation and for just doing well in life across the board. I think my experience with my mother was that my mother was a heroine. I mean, she became somewhat of a heroine because she suffered with this tension, this dialectic of having been a person who saved her family, but she also lost her virginity and was kind of, lost her sense of her ownership of her body during the war to save her family. And as you say, there's no way we can moralize. There should be no moralization or no judgment about what people do to survive in unfathomable circumstances. For me personally, it was difficult because I'll give you an example with my father, for example. This is what we want to avoid with kids. Well, this is a good example. When I was little, my father he was very passionate, and he would hug me and squeeze so hard that he didn't want to let go. And he'd start crying. And I thought, what did I do wrong? I mean, Dad's hugging me, he loves me. Why is he crying? And he would say to me, when I was probably by 5 or 6, he'd say, I love you so much, but you look exactly like my sister, and Hitler killed her. They killed my sister. Now he was and that made me empathetic. That allowed me to feel some compassion for him when he'd hug me hard and not let go. Or if he wouldn't let us lock a door at home because he was scared of what might go on that was out of his control. So, when you understand where your parents coming from, children of trauma develop empathy. I mean, that's just part of how it goes. But the reason it worked for me is that my parents were both very introspective. They were self-reflective. They were quick to understand what they were laying on their children. Not always, but often enough. And when they didn't know what they were doing, we'd figure it out. We'd try to figure it out. So from that standpoint, being introspective and being reflective and mindful, being able to think about how you feel is very helpful. In that case, my father did a very good job. He spared me one detail that I learned recently a few years ago, which is that he not only saw his sister killed, but he saw her be decapitated and saw her head roll away. And I think, if you're the spitting image of someone that you love that was murdered and you witnessed their murder, you could see why you would cry when you look at your child. So there's an example of kind of an epigenetic, direct effect of his trauma. So these things are important, and it starts at home. I mean, if parents are reflective and they know themselves well, and they don't hide from their history, it's less likely to contaminate the kids in a fearful and terrorizing way.
Oh, fascinating. That was something that I didn't know about and would not have written about in the book, obviously, for middle grade students. But I do want to read something from your book here that I think is relevant to what we're discussing. By the way, your book is, you've done a marvelous job of dedicating the full second half of your book to your own family history and unpacking a lot of the things that you've learned through the lens of your practice, which is absolutely fascinating. You write in one section here that after the liberation and war's end, Holocaust survivors' abilities to deal with the terrible trauma that befell them had a good deal to do with who they were and their age at the onset of their victimization. Their coping skills had much to do with their families of origin, the stability of their early life, their attachment style, life experience, and education. And then you say, anecdotally, survivors have fallen into two categories. The talkers confidently tell stories, while others remain silent and don't share their stories. While the dichotomy is specious and incorrect, both types can affect their children adversely. The point is that communication style, silent or rambling, does not mitigate the perceived terror affecting the family and those around them. I found that absolutely fascinating, and had not occurred to me before reading your book that much of how people process their experiences, they were not some amorphous group. Everyone came to this tragic time with their own particular upbringing, their own particular relationship with authority figures, their own particular reaction to being an only child or with siblings. And sometimes that gets lost in the sheer volume, the sheer weight of the Holocaust, that we are dealing with individual men, women, and children.
Yep, that's correct. I'm reminded of a book. The title eludes me, but it was a Holocaust book. It was a memoir. It was a second generation. The woman writing about her mother, and her mother was a complete brute. Her mother would beat her up and just was very abusive, verbally and physically. And it was everything this mother did, this child attributed to the Holocaust. And I thought, that's impossible. I mean, people do not become, people that survive the Holocaust do not become evil because of what they went through. They may suffer, they may have post-traumatic stress disorder, they may love their kids to death and still just ruin them unwittingly. But they're not going to become abusive, beating their children. So I felt like that was an example of something that was judged, incorrectly, because I've never seen that. I've never seen someone who was, I'm sure that mother was abused as a child herself. That's kind of what I think happened.
I see you're getting a lot of people liking your comments because they're
I don't know what
going up and down here.
I don't know what that's what those
I think it's a good sign, though. I
Oh.
think it's a good thing.
So,
by the way, I must tell you, just reading the general index in your book is an experience. Just going through it alphabetically, from attachment theory to the Dalai Lama movies like Citizen Kane and Raising Arizona. You go from Viktor Frankl to Martin Heidegger to Woody Allen Zelig in the space of a few pages. It's an amazing book with many contemporary references that I think people will find very useful. Jack, I see your hand is up. Did you want to say something?
I'm sorry, I did that by accident because I wanted to see if when I saw the balloons, I wanted to see what the comments was. But sorry about that. Sorry.
I think it means we're doing a good job what that's all about.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Jackie, would you like to spend a moment or two talking? We still have a few minutes left about alternative practices as a way of providing young people with access to their emotions and motives. And I say that not because we're expecting middle grade teachers to become to resume to be psychotherapists.
Yeah,
But I do think there might be place for it, at least from what I've learned from you. Would you mind describing a little bit about your discoveries?
Middle grade teachers are all parents or they're all children. So they're one or the other. So they can relate to this from a family standpoint. You know, I hate to say it, but I think everything starts at home with the parents. And if the child is raised in has a loving primary caretaker that's devoted, reliable, caring, giving, and nurturing, and can contain the child's emotions and help them develop a secure attachment, which means a healthy attachment so that they can go on to form other relationships later on that are meaningful and intimate, then that's great. But you know, with kids that have tough beginnings, it's harder. It's going to be a harder job for teachers because empathy is something that develops normally in a good enough environment. You learn you learn empathy by being treated well, and by understanding, by mirroring a child's difficulties, by containing their big feelings and helping them metabolize them. So you learn empathy by watching other people be good to other people, or by witnessing people treating other people well. So I think everything starts at home. As far as teachers, I mean, I think for this age group, we're talking about middle school. I think it's most important it's impossible to teach kids this age about the gruesome aspects of Holocaust history. I know for myself, I heard lots of stories when I was little, and I was 3 years old, and I slept in my parents' bedroom in my crib, and I heard all kinds of stuff like Shah, Hitler murderers, and I heard all that Hitler this and Hitler that. And until I was in 7th grade, I thought Hitler was basically the main person, and that there were a bunch of people that killed all the Jews. I really had no idea of the extent of the genocide. And then all of a sudden I'm shown Night and Fog, and I see corpses being piled into mass graves, and it shocked me. That was traumatic. So I think a way to, you can't, I don't really know how to teach the Holocaust to kids that are in middle school, but you can certainly give them the idea that human nature is very difficult, and that the best thing we can do is to know ourselves, because if we know ourselves, we can forgive ourselves, and we can identify how we feel, and then we're much less likely to point the finger at other people. If we go inwards, we're not going to point our finger outwards, and that's the direction we need to take.
Jackie, you put me in mind of one video testimony that I screened that probably has marked me more than all the others. And interestingly, it was not a Jewish witness to the Holocaust. It was not someone who had been through the camps or a death march. It was a former Hitler Youth who recalled what it was like being 13 or 14 years old in 1942 Berlin. And the country had gone to war, and he remembered that a friend of his down the street was given a torchlight parade for his birthday, and how proud he felt getting a uniform of a Hitler Youth. He said, "We've got the best nation in the world, and we're going to go to war, and I'm going to be a hero." And I'm listening to this, and I'm asking myself, all right, if I had been 13 years old, growing up in Berlin in the 1940s, would I have been made of some more intuitive stuff that would have made me say, now hold on, something's wrong here. I'm not going to be a part of this. This is bad. I'm not going to. I suspect I would have been as susceptible to the propaganda
Of course.
as anyone else.
Of course, because at that age, look, kids are just starting to separate and individuate for the second time. First time is when they're toddlers. They go into the little classroom, they fearful, they come back to their mom, they run back after 2 seconds. It's very hard to separate. But when you're a teenager, you really have to start that separation and individuation, becoming yourself. And there's enough research that shows you that this kind of being self-reflective and introspecting, I call it introspectating, because you're going in to feel, to understand your emotions and identify them and label them. And then you learn to think about them, which is really good for your brain, by the way. I mean, doing it makes you much smarter. It kind of creates all the executive function skills that we all want, that exist for leadership and rational mind and reasoning and all that. So kids don't, at this age, they're just struggling with a very fledgling identity, and they're very impressionable, and they're very peer oriented. So, yes, succumbing to peer pressure is very easy. And that's something they need to learn at this age, that peer pressure and mass psychology is very, very swaying. And when you join the herd, you lose your sense of reality, you lose your sense of reason, and you become much more emotional. And that's what we want to learn how to control. We want to learn how to control those raw, wild, painful emotions that can just take a hold and spread like wildfire.
The teachers I've spoken to about their experiences with middle grade classes, there's a uniformity of an appreciation for exploring how students may be exposed to propaganda in the world they know. What does it look like? How does it affect them? Where does it come in? What do they do about it? Are they immune to it? Are they not immune to it? So there are certain parallels. I don't think we want to make direct connections between the horrors of the Holocaust and the lives of young people today, but there are certainly parallels that can be drawn. We only have another few seconds here. Just as a closing comment, and then Jackie, I'm going to ask you if you have a closing comment. For me, as a teacher, the hardest challenge I've confronted is not teaching. It's closing my mouth and listening. I'm always anxious to want to make sure that I get a lesson across, a point across. And I think I do myself and the class a disservice when I do that. Very often, the most important thing is if you're presenting information in an appealing way, in an interesting way, the class will get involved. Students will ask questions, and that's a successful class. So that's the takeaway from my experiences in classrooms. Jackie, any closing thoughts before we open this up to the audience?
I mean, I have many, but in response to what you're saying, I mean, my experience with students is that there has to be respect in the classroom. There has to be a mutual understanding that everyone's voice is heard and equivalently important, equally important. And there has to be a sense of conscious curiosity. And this is attachment theory based. This is between people too. You have to be able to really want to know what that person's thinking. And I think if teachers engage that way as more of the process than the content, then that's a good thing. It's not always about the facts. Sometimes it's just about how the emotionality of what's being not being discussed. And I think that's very important.
Terrific. Thank you. Paul, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joshua, and thank you, Jackie, for, first of all, a wonderful presentation, a very thoughtful presentation, as I mentioned earlier. And Jackie, thank you so much for your reflections on raising children and what it is like to be the child of a survivor. There's a lot there that I have to think about, and I think the teachers have to think about. But one of the things that really struck me was the importance of being a nurturing parent and enabling the child or teaching the child to develop their own sense of identity, their own narrative, being personally strong in that way. And I think that, as we're talking about teaching difficult topics, this is such an important lesson, I think, for the teachers here and everybody, for the parents, all of us to really know. And you said it much better than I did, but thank you so much for that. We have a few minutes now for questions, and I know there are a couple questions came in already, but please take a moment now and send in some questions to the chat, preferably. And I see we do have a couple questions already, so let me see if I can read them. So here's a question. A teacher is at a school where the students are from a different culture and different cultures, and he's trying to teach night, and he's finding that they're not really engaged. Do you have any suggestions how to make the students more engaged? And I know you mentioned a moment ago about making it an interesting lesson, but if there's anything else that you'd like to add to that.
Is that addressed to Jackie or myself or all of us?
I think it's to both of you.
Jackie, would you like to?
I think the important thing to do is, there's not enough information about where the student's from and what the cultural differences are, but inherited trauma or the understanding of that is, without going into the magnitude of the atrocities, the Holocaust, but understanding it from a basic standpoint. The way kids respond to this is, the way children of these people respond is cross-culturally pretty consistent. So if there's some way you can ask him or ask the classroom, is there anything in your life that remotely resembles what we're learning? Do you know anyone that's had any kind of hardship that resonates with you? That might be one way to do it. But he may not be engaged for any number of reasons. It could be his personal psychology and what's going on with him. I can't say more than that, though.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
There might be as well some points of tangency for children from diverse backgrounds. If it's explained to them that Elie Wiesel was a teenager when he was in the camp, and that language was an issue. People coming from other than English backgrounds struggle with making themselves understood and understanding people speaking to them. That was certainly true for people who didn't speak German inside the camps. They didn't know what they were being asked to do, and they were punished for disobeying orders. There was an issue of acclimating to a new place and not knowing what the behavioral standards are, what other people are expecting of you, feeling different, marginalized, left out. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim has an interesting term for it. He calls it anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E, anomie, which means when you're being taken out of the environment, whether it's another country, another culture, another language, and you're thrust into an environment, you don't know what's expected, you don't know what to do, and you're adrift. That sense of adrift is often described by survivors.
It could also be creating some kind of anxiety in this young man. I don't know what he's like in other classrooms or in other classes, but children, if his parents suffered any kind of trauma, kids of people with PTSD are very, very hard for them to separate and individuate. And they're all overly cautious and taking very good care of their parents, especially the mothers. This refers to refugees, displaced persons, people that have PTSD for other reasons, parents who can't regulate their emotions and can't have a measure of calm, and just are all over the place. It's scary for kids, and so that could be an issue for him. What's his household like? What's his life like?
Great. No, thank you very much for those answers. think we have another question or two. And again, I want to invite people, better if you can submit the questions to the chat.
By the way, Paul, if
Yeah.
people are reluctant to ask questions, I've got about 1,000 that I would love to ask Jackie. So we're never going to run out of things to talk about.
So you know what? Why don't, in that case, if you don't mind going ahead and let's start with the first couple of them, and then by that time we'll probably get some more questions from the teachers.
We could go on for hours.
We can, we do whenever we get together. Yeah, yak. Jackie,
Sure.
I must say I'm fascinated. The first half of your book is case studies. You talk about people whom you have had as patients, a wide range of pathologies and behavioral issues. And the interesting thing for me was that it was like opening a different lens onto what I thought I had understood watching testimony. What are there any particular cases that you find yourself going to frequently to describe some of the key foundational points that you make with your students and your clients? I think, for example, from my discussions with you about self-reflection, for example, I think about mirroring. I think about your constant wanting people to hold a mirror up so that they're observing themselves and how they're behaving in their interactions with people. Have I understood properly? Is that one of the key tools of self-awareness?
Yes, so, one of the key tools that we call mentalizing. It's being able to know how you feel and understand how the other person feels and where they're coming from. Knowing someone else's mind, but you have to know your own first in order to create a separation. Otherwise, you project and you do all kinds of defensive maneuvers if you don't know yourself. If you don't know your blind spots. It's like driving in a car. You're driving and you have your rear view mirrors and you have your side view mirrors, but you know that there's a blind spot over there. And if you don't turn your head, you can have an accident. And so there's a subtle awareness of these things that are beneath the surface. And you talk about going deeper in conversation. Why is it? It's a depth psychology, because our unconscious is a vast place. It's a very fascinating place that rules most of the things we do are automatic. 95% of our functioning is outside of our conscious awareness. So, people are reluctant to plumb the depths of their unconscious mind, but, dreams and free association and flow thought and all that kind of good stuff really, really helps you make connections. So the thing that I have in common with the common thread between all my cases and my own memoir is this idea of divergent thinking, of becoming a creative thinker. Because when you can come up with 10 or 20 possibilities for why you feel a certain way or why you behaved a certain way, it's a lot richer. It's a lot richer life than coming up with the same stale response over and over again. So, I mean, I think one case in mind that I think about, and this actually wasn't a patient. This was in a store. It's chapter 2. I talk about a woman that called the police on me because I was in a boutique and she called the police on me, thinking I had a gun in my pocket, and she was very frantic about it. It's a whole chapter, but basically, the punchline is that and there were 6 cops that, they frisked me, they took their guns out. They thought I was carrying a firearm based on her 911 call. And the bottom line is that it was such poor judgment on her part. I mean, your judgment can really be clouded if you just respond to your triggers. And this is what we need to teach young people, that you have to be able to stop and think before you act. And this young woman, her name was Dana, she had come from gun violence as a child. She'd seen a friend get killed. She'd been in a gangy neighborhood, and she was traumatized. She didn't realize that. So she just had she had a knee-jerk response, and that, she ended up making me feel as scared as she felt. And that's why victims become perpetrators. And that's why it's very important to be self-aware, because I mean, in a familial sense, dynastically, but also socially and culturally, if we don't get a grip of ourselves, the victims become the perpetrators, even unwittingly. Even good people can become perpetrators, and they can do damage without wanting to. And
Um,
the other thing I want to say, the one other thing I want to say is most important in becoming a better person or becoming an upstander or whatever, however we want to, kinder, is you have to be able to repair. You have to be able to repair ruptures. You have to know how to fight well, and you have to know how to say you're sorry and recognize what your role is in how you're involved in whatever the communication is that went awry.
Thank you so much for the question and for the answer. We have actually another question here that Jack Klieger poses, which is, have you looked at second and third generation interactions, and how have you found that they are similar or different?
Josh?
I think it's directed to you, but
Oh, directed to me, okay.
yeah,
Second and third generation interactions, you mean with each other or?
that's a good question.
Yes, I mean, second generation.
Jack, you're muted. So
Second
Yes,
generation.
I was very interested in terms of intergenerational trauma and how it's either carried over or not carried over.
It's always carried over.
Yeah.
It's the baggage is always in. I mean, it's inherited emotion, you know. It's and it's not necessarily all bad. It's not all traumatic. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. This was traumatic in the sense that my father's emotionality made no sense for the context. So here's a story. Take a second. When I was little, my dad would scream and yell at us if we ran down the stairs, because he thought his little porcelain collection of figurines that was sturdily locked in a cabinet that was not at risk would break. He thought the vibrations from the flimsy staircase would rattle his little figurines and they would break. And he'd go nuts. And we just thought, Dad's nuts. It's so weird. Like, what's that about? And then I found out recently, I mean, a few years ago, and this is why storytelling is so important in families, to connect to your ancestry and to connect to your parents to understand who they were, because you need to be empathetic for your parents' story and understand their narrative, but then you can take it or leave it or update it to make sense for you. So I updated that story when I learned that my dad, when the Nazis first occupied his town, to save his own life, he said he was an egg sorter and packer. So he started sorting eggs and packing them. And if he of course was well aware that if you broke an egg, you got shot in the head that second. And so it was a very precarious job to have. And so, you know, then I realized that he would pack things and store things very carefully. And these figurines were all beautiful people, Europeans in beautiful clothing, playing instruments, music, dancing. And that was far from a life that he had. And these little figurines were really stand-in for people. And because he had no control over his whole family that was wiped out, and he couldn't control his children because we were people and we had our own lives, it was very hard for him. So that was, if I knew that it was a stand-in for the eggs breaking, I would have had a little more sympathy. I would have been a little more compassion, because we just said, you know, blew him off and said, that's nuts. And he didn't realize, he didn't make a connection between broken eggs and broken people and broken lives. But it was a displacement onto the figurines. He was scared that we would hurt ourselves. He was scared that things could happen to us and he'd lose us. So there's an example. That's not a tragic, terrible thing, but it comes from a dark place. And once you put a label on it, you put a perspective on it, it makes sense. I mean, when the saleswoman, you know, called the police on me and they came after I heard what, and when the police came, I said, you know, this woman is either psychotic or she's had trauma. I mean, those are the only two options, because I was there with a toddler, and you know, I'm a small, slight person. She was towering over me. It made no sense to even profile me that way if you were going to do that, which is not appropriate anyway. But she just responded her judgment was so impaired. So, you know, it's very important to know what you're doing and to know what you're thinking. So I would say that second generation kids are prone to not understanding the chaos that they feel. There's a lot of anxiety, depression, or feelings of being lost that they can't necessarily label. And and their brain changes too, but that's a whole nother topic of, cortisol and epigenetics of stress. But yes, there's a lot of similarities that get passed on.
Thank you for that answer, and I think your answers also generated some more questions. So let me go through them now, and in no particular order. So one of the questions is considering what's going on today in the world, in the Middle East and the United States for that matter, how do we get students to focus on talking about the Holocaust or something else, let's say another important topic, when they're so distracted by current events? I guess that's for either of you, probably more for Joshua.
Well, you enter into discussions of current events at your own risk. If you're a teacher, especially if you're in the public school system, just be prepared for the worst. There is no safe ground talking about current events. It's that simple. However, I don't think it's off the table to talk about how life can be very complicated and there are many things that we have to manage simultaneously, and to pose it in the form of a question. How do we simultaneously defend ourselves, our families, our loved ones, our communities, our homes, our countries, our places of worship, our belongings from attack, and at the same time respect the dignity of life? Are those two things mutually exclusive, or are they possible? And usually, because I have had some background in war crimes law, that's an opportunity for me, if I'm asked that question, to describe how international law is predicated on the precarious balance between these two elements. One is called necessity, and the other is called humanity. Necessity means that in the pursuit of a redress of grievances, if you are aggressed upon, you can do whatever you have to do to defend yourself. There are no restrictions in terms of what you have to do to defend yourself and your loved ones. Humanity says, in doing that, you must not cause any more harm than absolutely necessary, which is why, for example, soldiers in battle can sometimes be held accountable for war crimes. If they cross that line, a soldier is immune from killing an enemy. If a soldier kills a civilian, there could be some question about the legitimacy of that action. So that's the fulcrum upon which international law is based. The conventions, the Hague Convention, the Geneva Convention, and so on. So I think it's possible to isolate a particular element of current events and phrase that in the form of an issue to be explored and discussed.
Thank you for that. That was a really great and very useful answer. And thank you to the teacher who asked the question as well. Here's another question, which is probably more towards Jackie, which is, do you have any, or really both of you, I guess, do you have any suggestions for classroom practices when dealing with students who have experienced intergenerational trauma?
Well, I'm going to say first, the most important thing is there has to be a basis of trust. It has to feel like a trusting, nurturing, and safe environment. Without that, there's not much that can be done. It's like you can't learn anything if you can't pay attention. I think teachers know that. So I think without that, and without a sense of mutual respect and the foundation of trust, you can't necessarily proceed. But otherwise, I still think that the social and emotional learning modules, emotional intelligence is the way to go. I mean, I want to keep it short, but that's what I would focus on. I would focus on them being able to recognize their feelings, label them, and then learn to act rationally based on how they feel.
No, thank you for that. Let me see.
I could add a little bit, if I may.
Please.
My wife is a member of the Long Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Today it's called the Safe Center. They merged with another organization against child violence. And because of her involvement, I took some training at the Safe House, as it's called now. From the little bit of training I had there, plus what I've learned from Jackie, I realized that I didn't even know how to identify possible trauma, possible violence at home. I didn't know how to pick up on the symptoms. That took some training. And I need to do more of that because sometimes the signals are very subtle. So maybe it would be useful if a teacher is particularly sensitive to that issue in her or his class to get the training necessary to go deeper, to understand how do we identify signs of trauma, signs of possible domestic violence, and then, of course, partnering with sister organizations in your area so that you know what to do and where to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that. And it's always probably good to have more training and more, especially in these kinds of sensitive areas.
There's different kinds of trauma, though. I mean, there's domestic violence as an example, which is it's horrible. But there's also the trauma of having a parent who's very sick or a parent who has post-traumatic stress disorder, which is very stressful for anyone in the family. And there's probably about 50 million of those in the United States just from COVID. So I think Alexandra Zapruder has a very interesting program, which I think we had her at the museum a year or two ago, called Voices from COVID or Lessons from COVID, where she actually had students write about their COVID experiences, their COVID traumas. And they were reading some of these, like my mother's book, they were reading Hidden in conjunction with their own stories and their own writing. And they wrote about how they could relate and how they couldn't. So that was something that I thought was important to say.
Yeah, creative activity can often bring things out that just dialogue or discussion won't. So whether it's art or music or poetry or enactments through dramatic sessions.
Role playing is very good too.
Very, very powerful.
Role playing is a good one for classroom, I think.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to, we're running out. We still have a few minutes, but if anybody would like to submit another question, this is a good opportunity to do so. And I do have another question here, so I'm going to read it, which is, let me see if I understand it. I think the question is something like this. Well, I'll read it and then we'll see how it goes. If the way that people handled trauma of the war was based on who they were at the beginning of the war, which is something that we were talking about earlier, how did that work or not for child survivors? Right, who did not have the fully formed personality. Does that make sense?
You mean adult survivors who were children when they were in hiding or in camp? I mean,
so I guess if I understand this question correctly, that somebody who was adult at the onset of the war already had a personality and already had a way of, had a developed personality, had a way of addressing things, whereas a child survivor didn't have that opportunity to develop.
well, they're very different circumstances, just like they're very different circumstances between, let's say, me and my sister, and we're second generation children of survivors. We're not survivors of anything ourselves. We're survivors of the survivors, but that's a whole topic. But she grew up in post-war Germany. She didn't go to school. She was homeschooled, if anything. She lived in one room with 5 people. There was anti-Semitism was still rampant. She was a terrorized kid from just being in Germany. And her first 10 years were like that. I came around 12 years later, and I essentially had different set of parents. My parents they had learned a lot already. The Holocaust was being spoken about. There were war criminal trials already. There were the Nuremberg trials, and books were being written about the Holocaust. Testimonies were starting. So they were getting some validation. And I grew up in a regular house, and I went to the same school. I had regularity in my life. And so, in essence, we had different lives. So this applies to anyone. under any circumstance. Life's very different at different times. It's not static. So I speak about, I say this in terms of my mother. My mother was 16 when the war broke out, and she came from a very stable household. She had a very good relationship with her father, okay with her mother, but no great conflicts. And she was a very smart girl, and she used her imagination and got through. But she had good attachments. She had a healthy character structure, which was kind of broken down from the war, but she was able to reconstitute herself. My father, on the other hand, he had a much harder time. He wasn't saved by anyone. He was running. He was doubly orphaned by the time he was 6 or 7. And he had much more difficult circumstances. And his memories were much more fragmented, and he never spoke about it. So, it's very, as Joshua said, these things are very individualistic. They're very particular to the individual circumstance. And there's no great generalizations except to say that the emotional terror and fear is completely inheritable. You never have to hear a story, but the affect's there, and it gets transmitted like it by osmosis. You just absorb it, and it's nameless dread.
Jackie, you remind me of something I heard your mother say on a videotape of a class she was giving, where some of the students were complaining about their lives. And your mom looked at them and said, if I can live through what I lived through and be here today with you, what's your problem?
Wow. Thank you. I want to thank both of you for really wonderful conversation, and very meaningful and thought-provoking. And I think it's going to be very useful for all the teachers who are here and everybody else who's here. It was, thank you. It was really great. We're going to now transition to our award, and here is Don. So let me go ahead and say a little bit about Don. So it is my honor to present this year's Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Award for excellence in Holocaust education. The award goes to Ms. Dawn Panabianco. Dawn teaches 5th grade English language arts at PS IS 276 at the Battery Park City School, where she's been on the faculty since 2010. And let me just say that Dawn's first encounter with the museum was in the summer of 2005, when she took our introductory Meeting Hate with Humanity course. It was the beginning of a relationship that would grow to mean a lot to Dawn and to us over the many years of her work as an educator. And she's participated in many professional development workshops and activities sponsored by the museum, including when Dawn and her 5th grade students helped plant the children's tree in 2021, and participated in the dedication ceremony, lifting their voices in song to welcome the sapling to New York City. The museum's education department has worked with Dawn to pilot lessons before the opening of our new core exhibition, The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do. And the museum shared the text for the exhibition for the students to read, and they provided valuable feedback. This summer, Dawn wrote the curriculum for educators for the first Holocaust exhibition geared towards students, Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, which is currently in view at the museum. And Dawn, I want to thank you for all you do for Holocaust education. Your work merits recognition, and you are now officially granted with this year's Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Award for Excellence. And I just want to read, Dawn, if I may, the inscription on the award. So the inscription is presented to Dawn Panabianco, Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Award for Excellence in Holocaust Education, March 10th, 2024, 30 Adar 1, 5784, Rosh Chodesh Adar 2. And with that, I am very pleased, thank you. very pleased to turn the floor over to Don.
Thank you. Thank you to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Thank you to friends, colleagues, family, past and present at PSIS 276 Battery Park City School, and most of all, our amazing students. Thank you to the family of Fanya Gottesfeld Heller. Thank you to Fanya Gottesfeld Heller. There is a phrase that Jewish people say to mourners when a person dies: may their memory be a blessing. It is an expression of hope and a reminder that it is up to those who know her memory to keep it alive. It is so clear in the case of Fanya that the force of her life, her work, and her character echoes on. That it is very much a blessing fulfilled. To say that I am honored to accept this award in the name of this exceptional woman and to keep her memory and legacy alive would be an understatement. Keeping memories alive is one of the goals of Holocaust education, as our speakers today have reminded us. As time passes, memories fade. We must not let this happen. The Holocaust cannot become an event too far removed from memory. Forgetting poses danger. The names and faces must remain vivid in our collective memory. We must keep the stories alive. As an English language arts teacher, my work and life revolve around stories. Each person is a story waiting to be told. In this case, there are more than 6 million stories to be told. By remembering the Holocaust and teaching its stories, we honor those who suffered unspeakable trauma and inhumane conditions because of their Jewish identity. When we teach about the Holocaust, we are honoring the lives of those who were senselessly murdered because of their Jewish identity. When we teach about the Holocaust, we honor the potential of all that was lost to the world. When we teach about the Holocaust, we combat anti-Semitism and prejudice. When we teach about the Holocaust, we show how a person's identity can be weaponized, and we seek to protect all aspects of a person's expression of identity. When we teach about the Holocaust, we model empathy and compassion for people we may never meet. When we teach about the Holocaust, we say out loud, never again will we allow this to happen. Recent world events warn us that this message continues to be necessary more than ever, just 8 short decades after the genocide of the Holocaust. Part of saying never again means being an ally. Being an ally is a way of showing love in a world of sorrow. Also the title of Fanya's memoir that continues to remind me of the need for love in our world during these challenging times. I know that many of my students are joining us on this presentation. You are the greatest hope for our future. When you learn about the Holocaust and really listen to the stories of people's experiences, you honor their experiences and their legacy, looking ahead toward a more inclusive future where every identity is protected. When you take these lessons of empathy to heart and show value for people's diverse backgrounds and experiences, and turn your beliefs into actions on behalf of others, you are an ally. Children are the most wonderful allies when they learn about injustices. They have an innate sense of what is right and wrong that adults can help develop. As educators, we can help students learn important lessons about empathy, identity, and the importance of being an ally through Holocaust education. Last year, our 5th grade students visited the museum on 4 different occasions. How lucky are we to be right across the street, making so many visits possible? On one occasion, we visited Martin Scholer's portrait exhibition, Survivors: Faces of Life After the Holocaust. The exhibition features 75 photographs created in collaboration with Yad Vashem to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. In his signature portrait style, Scholer's photographs are close-ups, revealing the humanity and the personality and the character of each survivor. We used this opportunity as a lesson in empathy. We each sat in front of a photograph in the gallery, face to face, human to human. We drew the beautiful faces of these survivors, looking into their eyes, seeing them in all of their humanity. complete with the lines of a lifetime of smiles and frowns, the freckles earned on a sunny day, their deep, knowing eyes that likely experienced and saw more than anyone should. But they continued to persevere. We drew them and paid attention to the details of their faces and expressions. We wrote "I wonder" and "I wish" statements. We spent time with them, getting to know them. Empathy is seeing others in all of their humanity. The survivors' faces tell a story, and we need to listen. We owe that to them. We owe that to our future. We can all learn empathy by taking the time to listen to the stories of the past, to look into one another's eyes and say, "I see you and you matter." This summer, I had the personal and professional privilege of creating the educator curriculum for the museum's newest exhibition, which is their first dedicated to teaching children about the Holocaust. I researched, wrote, and reflected. I wrote lessons for teachers who will visit the exhibition with their students. What were the salient themes of this exhibition that we wanted to convey to visitors of all ages? Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark is a testament to how everyday people, both Jews and non-Jews, use their voices, their bravery, determination, and their love of their fellow humans during one of the darkest times in history to positively impact the lives of Jewish people during the Holocaust. It is a testimony to the impact that citizens can have in the face of injustice. It is a message that we continue to need in our world, and as educators and students, we all have an opportunity to spread this message to others through our words and actions. There is a framed quote on my desk at school, the words spoken by Eleanor Roosevelt, head of the Human Rights Committee, instrumental in formulating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the United Nations. This quote has followed me through every step along my career path, a fixture on my desk wherever I land in my professional endeavors, and it is one that I revisit quite often to remind me of my purpose. Quote, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerned citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world." End quote. We all have an opportunity to uphold universal human rights close to our home, in our communities, and in our schools. As educators and citizens, it is our contribution to progress in the larger world. The greatest way for us to uphold universal human rights is to really see one another, past or present, to wonder and wish for one another, looking into our neighbor's eyes, seeing them in all of their humanity, complete with their own smile and frown lines from their own life experiences. By showing our own empathy for our fellow human beings, we can uphold human rights close to home and in the larger world. Holocaust education is my contribution to progress. Thank you for this award as an acknowledgement and a reminder of my purpose. I promise to honor Fanya's legacy by continuing to raise a voice for Holocaust education, by always being an ally, and by continuing to look at my fellow humans in all of their humanity, saying, "I see you and you matter in this world." Thank you.
Don, thank you so much for those very, very moving words. And as I was listening to your comments, it occurred to me how many connections there were between what you were saying and what Joshua was saying and what Jackie was saying. So it was really, I think you brought everything together very beautifully, and thank you. And I was fortunate enough to sit in on the day when Dawn brought her students to the Martin Scholler exhibit, and it was amazing to watch all those students drawing pictures, sketching the pictures of the survivors. So it was really a really very moving experience, and something that was also age appropriate. So thank you so much. I want to take a moment now to thank our speakers today, Joshua Greene, Dr. Jacqueline Heller, and Don Panabianco for joining us today. I want to thank you all of you for your extraordinary work and sharing your time this afternoon. I'd like to thank all of the teachers who came here today and other people who came, including people who came to support Dawn in getting her award. I'd like to also echo Jack Klieger's words of deep appreciation for Mrs. Fanya Gottesfeld Heller of blessed memory, who I had the good fortune to know, actually. And I'd also like to add my thanks to Dr. Jackie Heller, who has carried on her legacy to educate about the Holocaust. And thank you for making this year's conference possible. With these thanks to the speakers and to you, our audience, the 23rd annual Fanya Gottesfeld Heller Conference for Educator comes to a close. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I wish everybody a great afternoon. Thank you.